archetype in a very human sense. Lewis in The Abolition of Man, which that title itself is worth about an hour's deep reflection, talks about, in the first chapter, talks about what happens when literature no longer becomes a primary exercise in ways at which to view the world, but tools in which to deconstruct, to use words that are very much on the modern radar. Which, hang on, let's look really quickly. Tell me when it was published. No. Daniel, would you mind looking up really quick when The Abolition of Man was first published?
When The Abolition of Man was first published?
So, and I'm in saying this, and I don't think Lewis would say this either, that Dune, that doesn't make Dune a lesser book and that it's a critique of specific things. It's still very much literature. Complex, very, very much at that. Because even the Bible has polemics against, I mean, Genesis is a great example. There's polemics against other creation narratives. So literature being polemic in nature is not necessarily an evil or bad thing. That's not what Lewis is discussing. Hopefully it'll be clear what he's getting at in a moment.
Yeah.
But
1943, by the way.
Okay. So 43. So that was 20 years before he did. So yeah. Okay. So it's what, 80 years old?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just listen to what he has to say. But point is, polemics aren't a bad thing. But let's say when the nature of, and he's going to talk specifically about teaching literature, become only a way in which to see through what everyone's doing. So not to see, but to see through. I hope that differentiation makes sense. Things get very dangerous very quickly. So Lewis says, and this is the beginning of chapter 1. Chapter 1 is called Men Without Chess. And we'll get to what that means here in a bit. He says, I doubt whether we are sufficiently attentive to the importance of elementary textbooks. This is why I've chosen at the starting point of these lectures a little book on English intended for boys and girls in the upper forms of school. I do not think the authors of this book, there were 2 of them, intended any harm, and I owe them, or their publisher, good language for sending me a complimentary copy. At the same time, I shall have nothing good to say of them. He's so English. Here is a pretty predicament. I do not want to pillory 2 modest practicing schoolmasters who were doing the best they knew, but I cannot be silent about what I think the actual tendency of their work. I therefore propose to conceal their names. I shall refer to these gentlemen as Gaius and Titius, and to their book as the Green Book, but I promise you there is such a book, and I have it on my shelves. In their second chapter, Gaius and Titius quote the well-known story of Coleridge at the waterfall. You remember that there were 2 tourists present. The one called it sublime and the other pretty. And that Coleridge mentally endorses the first judgment and rejects the second with disgust. So it is sublime and not pretty. Gaius and Titius comment as follows. When the man said, "This is sublime," he appeared to be making a remark about the waterfall. Actually, he was not making a remark about the waterfall, but a remark about his own feelings. What he was saying was, I really have feelings associated in my mind with the word sublime, or shortly, I have sublime feelings. End of quote of Gaius and Titius. Here are a good many deep questions settled in a pretty summary fashion. But the authors are not yet finished. They add, quote, this confusion is continually present in language as we use it. We appear to be saying something very important about something, and actually we are only saying something about our own feelings, end quote. Lewis continues, before considering the issues raised by this momentous little paragraph, designed, you remember, for the upper forms of school, we must eliminate one mere confusion into which Gaius and Titius have fallen, even on their own view, on any conceivable view, that the man who says this is sublime cannot mean I have sublime feelings. Even if it were granted that such qualities as sublimity were simply and solely projected onto things from our own emotions. Yet the emotions which prompt the projection are the correlatives, and therefore almost the opposite of the qualities projected. The feelings which make a man call an object sublime are not sublime feelings, but feelings of veneration. I'll read that again. If it were granted that such qualities as sublimity were simply and solely projected onto things from our emotions, yet the emotions which prompted the projection are the correlatives, and therefore almost the opposites of the qualities projected. The feelings which make a man call an object sublime are not sublime feelings, but feelings of veneration. If this is sublime is to be reduced at all to a statement about the speaker's feelings, the proper translation would be, I have humble feelings. If the view held by Gaius and Titius were consistently applied, it would lead to obvious absurdities. It would force them to maintain that you are contemptible means I have contemptible feelings. In fact, that your feelings are contemptible means my feelings are contemptible. But we need not delay over this, which is very pointus osorium of our subject. It would be quite unjust to Gaius and Titius themselves to emphasize what was doubtless a mere inadvertence. I'm going to read. So, do you have any comments so far? I have one more paragraph for this
No.
section.
You
Okay,
finish it off and then we can talk.
because he's rounding out his point here.
Yeah.
The schoolboy who reads this passage in the Green Book, the one about the waterfall being sublime or not sublime, or feelings of sublimity, mere projections. The schoolboy who reads this passage in the Green Book will believe two propositions. Firstly, that all sentences containing a predicate of value are statements about the emotional state of the speaker. And secondly, that all such statements are unimportant. It is true that Gaius and Titius have said neither of these things in so many words. They have treated only one particular predicate of value, sublime, as a word descriptive of the speaker's emotions. The pupils are left to do for themselves the work of extending the same treatment to all predicates of value, and not the slightest obstacle to such extensions is placed in their way. The authors may or may not desire the extensions. They may never have given the question 5 minutes serious thought in their lives. I'm not concerned with what they desire, but what the effect of their book will certainly have on the schoolboy's mind. In the same way, they have not said that judgments of value are unimportant. Their words are that we appear to be saying something very important, when in reality we are only saying something about our own feelings. No schoolboy will be able to resist the suggestion brought to bear upon him by the word only. I do not mean, of course, that he will make any concession, conscience inference from what he reads to a general philosophical theory that all values are subjective and trivial. The very power of Gaius and Titius depends upon the fact that they are dealing with a boy who thinks he is doing his English prep and has no notion that ethics, theology, and politics are all at stake. It is not a theory put into his mind, but an assumption, which 10 years hence, its origin forgotten and its presence unconscious, in its presence unconscious, will condition him to take one side in a controversy which he has never recognized as a controversy at all. The authors themselves, I suspect, hardly know what they are doing to the boy and cannot know what is being done to him.
Wow.
So what is Lewis saying?
Well, first of all, I mean, okay, maybe because I'm taking this a little further down the rabbit hole than where we should probably start. So how about you talk and then I'll follow it up.
Okay, from what I can gather, I have two other sections I think are going to be interesting here, but to start with this example he gives of this book, and it's the chapter is called Men Without Chest, and we'll get there what he means by that specifically in a minute. But to go with our current framing of the discussion, literature and Lewis's view, and this is why I started with Lewis, because he's threaded throughout this whole discussion, as a lens through which to view the world, is undercut by those who say, because, okay, let's put it this way. He's undercutting the spirit of cynicism, which we talked about earlier, in the sense that those who are deconstructionists and cynics would say, oh, I really see what you're doing there. You thought that the waterfall was sublime, that it was magnificent, that it had these certain qualities of subliminality. Sure. Is that how you?
I don't know.
Anyway, you thought it had these certain qualities that made it sublime, but really, those are just your feelings about the waterfall. It says nothing objective about the waterfall. And I don't know if I'm going to get there later, but, and he's so good with just these, man.
Correct. Yeah.
Lewis could have been well, he wanted to be a poet for a long time. This is why he's good at these things.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about when you make a statement that the shoe fits, you are not just making a statement about the shoe, but saying something about the foot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see what you're doing there. You're just talking about how you feel about the waterfall. It's no statement actually about the waterfall itself. So if literature is a lens through which to view the world, which to see these things and then judge the view of that, and this is why that the consignment by McGrath is so important about the reliability of that view on the actual world. And then again, you could ask, what do you mean by actual world? But this, anyway, there is no, in this view of Gaius and Titius in the Green Book, there's no actual world. It's all our projections on the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Lewis is fighting.
Yeah. There is no world. There is just the lens.
Yes, that's a good way to say it.
And what Lewis is saying is there is a world and there is a lens. And these things are somehow in an interplay. And it's important to keep both in mind, because if you throw the world out and you just keep the lens, then what you've really done, and he walks through this progression quite nicely, right? 10 years down the road, this boy who was told the waterfall wasn't sublime, that was this man's reaction to the waterfall, because the waterfall, it can't be sublime, it's subjective. You start from that point and you walk all the way up to 10 years later. This now man is engaged in politics, religion, civility in general, and all he sees is other people projecting themselves, and he doesn't see anything that actually is. And what now you have is an absolute relativist.
Mhm.
And to quote an agnostic friend of mine, absolute relativism is absurd because, and this is no right-leaning person by any stretch of the imagination, because absolute relativism destroys itself.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it was Aristotle who had the critique of absolute relativism in saying that, if two statements can be true at one point in time and they contradict each other, then everything breaks down and you truly do have nothing at that point. Right?
This is why it
And
leads to nihilism.
yeah, exactly. Because then everything becomes pointless. And that can't be the way the world works, especially because the world is in many ways predictable. Right? The
Patterns.
predictive do what?
To use Peterson's word from earlier, and something that Peugeot talks about all the time, there's patterns,
Yeah.
deep
And
patterns.
you don't have patterns without substantiality. You
And
just don't.
And to make to connect those two, it's the rejection of that kind of pattern that is in the phrase, oh, well, no, he just had feelings of sublimity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the pattern here, right, is if this man sees another waterfall that is similar, or another, let's say, mountain range, or beautiful pasture, he has those same feelings of sublimity. That's a pattern. And that pattern represents something that is not just the lens, but it's also the world. And those things are in interplay. And so a magnification of either the lens or the world at the expense of the other doesn't create a constructive framework, to go back to a phrase we use in our conversation on Augustine and the Bible as art. It doesn't create a constructive framework for viewing the world.
Mm-hmm. This is in the few ways which I will agree with postmodernism, which we also talked about in our conversation about art. This is to critique the modernists that would say, all I need is the observable world, which is even an interesting phrase, to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no, but there's also an observer. This goes back to the question, and this is a fun question to ask people. So if it's the classic, if a tree in the forest falls and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So so Illmind, who's a great producer in the hip hop community, used that for, it's one of my favorite like short snips he has on Instagram, but he uses that phrase with a meetup he has with a bunch of, guys who are trying to get into music production.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, people always say, if is there a tree in the forest that falls, does anybody hear it? And he goes, well, yeah, all that heat that you have that's just sitting on your hard drive. Well, if no one hears it, does it really matter?
Yeah.
And that's the answer. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound if there's no one there? And I think the correct answer is it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Because one, no one was there to, I mean, you can describe this in the completely scientific, objective way, right? It made airwaves move, right? Or
But
you
they
can
never hit
describe
any
this,
ears.
but they
So
never hit any ears. And so you can describe this from the opposite perspective, right? Well, it never hit the eardrums. And so because it never hit any eardrums, the sound wasn't received, so it didn't make a sound. But and right, this goes back to the larger point that we're making here. Both the lens and the world are required. Because if you don't have both, you're missing a crucial part of how the world functions. So you need both the hearer and the tree. So like you said, it doesn't matter because no one was there anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to move on, Lewis makes the point that we're a similar point, if not the same point that we're making right now. He says, until quite modern times, all teachers and even all men believe the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could be either congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objectives did not merely receive, but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. The reason why Coleridge agrees with the tourist who called the cataract sublime and disagreed with the one who called it pretty was, of course, that he believed inanimate nature to be such that certain responses could be more just or ordinate or appropriate to it than others. And he believed correctly that the tourist thought the same. The man who called the cataract sublime was not intending simply to describe his own emotions about it. He was also claiming that the object was one which merited those emotions. But for this claim, there would be nothing to agree or disagree about. To disagree with this is pretty, if those words simply describe the lady's feelings, would be absurd. If she had said, I feel sick, Coleridge would have replied, no, I feel quite well. When Shelley, having compared the human sensibility to an Aeolian lyre, goes on to add that it differs from a lyre in having a power of internal adjustment whereby it can accommodate its chords to the motions of that which strikes them. He assumes the same belief. Can you be righteous? Asked Lewis uses all these Greek and mythological examples, which I am not familiar with. Can you be righteous? Asked Traherne. Unless you be just in rendering to things their due esteem. Unless you be just in rendering to things their due esteem. All things are made to be yours, and you are made to prize them according to their value.
So an interesting thought there is ideas of value, they inherently posit something objective, or at least loosely objective, about the thing being talked about, right? Now, of course, value, the inexactitude, right? So like a precise value is subjective. So if you want to talk about just the economy for a second, the value of a piece of candy at the gas station, that's subjective in the sense that there are a lot of inputs that go into making that value. And this would be a general critique of Marxism too, because Marx sees value as entirely derived from the person doing the manufacturing and selling, like the guy in charge. Back to my air quotes for today. And the but what Marx misses out on is that value isn't just derived from that. Value is derived from how hard and expensive it is to get the resources, how expensive it is to put those resources together into a cohesive whole, and then get that cohesive whole to the person willing to exchange money for it. And so the value has to be greater at or greater than the
pieces of the thing.
The pieces of the thing, because then you're at a loss, right? You lose money on the transaction. And so it's not, value isn't subjective. It's not. It's a very objective thing, right? Because if you go to the flip side, now there are like subjective pieces to it, and this would be the flip side, right? things are as valuable as consumers are willing to pay for them, monetarily speaking, right? But they can never go below that threshold. Otherwise, there's an imbalance, right? So I could pay $5 for a candy bar if I value the candy bar that much. But I can never pay under $1 for the candy bar. Otherwise, the person producing the candy bar can no longer produce candy bars. Right. And so that's the balance of objective and subjective, right? That's the balance of doing art, like we talked about. And that's the balance of the lens and the world.
Correct. Okay, I want to read this a little bit, and then we'll get to Men Without Chess here in a minute. And this kind of sets up what he's getting at here. He's talking about specifically in this section the nobility of death, especially in the patriotic sense. And he says, where the old initiated, the new merely conditions. That's what we're thinking about. Where the old initiated, the new merely conditions. The old dealt with its pupils as grown birds deal with young birds when they teach them to fly. The new deals with them more as the poultry keeper deals with young birds, making them thus for purposes of which the birds know nothing. In a word, the old was kind of propagation, men transmitting manhood to men. The new is merely propaganda. This is the end of the chapter. The operation of the Green Book and its kind is to produce what may be called men without chess. It is an outrage, and they should be commonly spoken. It is an outrage that they should be commonly spoken of as intellectuals. This gives them the chance to say that he who attacks them attacks intelligence. Lewis would call that a bulverism. It is not so. They are not distinguished from other men by any unusual skill in finding truth or any virginal ardor. That is such a great phrase. They are not distinguished from other men by any unusual skill to find truth or any virginal ardor to pursue her. Indeed, it would be strange if they were. A preserving devotion to truth, a nice sense of intellectual honor, cannot be long maintained without the aid of a sentiment which Gaius and Titius could debunk as easy as any other. It is not exercise of thought, but defect of fertile and generous emotion that marks them out. Let me read that again. It is not excess of thought, but defect of fertile and generous emotion that marks them out. Their heads are no bigger than the ordinary. It is the atrophy of the chest beneath that makes them so. And all the time, such is the tragi-comedy of our situation, we continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. This was written 80 years ago, okay? Keep this in mind.
Yeah.
At all the time, such is the tragic comedy of our situation. We continue, and we'll get back to this, we continue to clamor for those qualities which we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across a statement that what our civilization needs is more drive or dynamism or self-sacrifice or creativity. In a short of ghastly simplicity, in a short of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. Men without chess. We make men without chess and expect them virtue and all right, I'm going to read that again, partially because I'm slipping over it, but partially because it's so important. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across a statement that what our civilization needs is more drive or dynamism or self-sacrifice or creativity. And a short of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chest and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the gildings be fruitful.
We remove half of the equation and expect it to add up to something useful.
So he talks here about the relationship between the head and the heart. These are indispensable liaison officers between cerebral man and visceral man. Interesting word choice there. To continue, it may even be said that it is by this middle element that man is man, the chest. For by his intellect he is mere spirit, and by his appetite, mere animal. And I'm going to read it again. And all the time, such is the tragic comedy of our situation. We continue to clamor for those very qualities we are rendering impossible. You can hardly open a periodical without coming across the statement that what our civilization needs is more drive. It's not drive, it's not power.
Mm-hmm.
But think about this. Think about the people that we exalt. Dwayne Johnson, Gary Vee, Joe Rogan. We need more drive or dynamism or self-sacrifice. We don't talk about that much anymore, by the way.
Yeah.
Or creativity. We talk about that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ, the heart, the chest, the interplay between the intellectual and the animal, and demand the function. Why can't men be more understanding?
Because I've told them not to be.
We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the gildings be fruitful. Men without chests. Because the Green Book teaches them from their secondary education. Oh, no. That objective world, that thing that you are observing,
Mm-hmm.
has no value of its own. It is merely your projections. And a point he makes later in the book, I think it's maybe the most profound thing that we need to think about for about 10 years. Oh, the spirit of cynicism. Oh, I see what you're doing there. Underneath all of that, this is what's really going on. Lewis talks about, he says, it's a great thing that the window in my office is transparent so that I can see the road or the building. But what if the road was transparent or the building? Say, and he uses the analogy to say, in proposing that all you do is this, oh, I really see what's going on there. Oh, I see through. To say that all you're doing is seeing through certain things or using or making it all about the projection. Oh, I see. It's that waterfall. It's not really sublime. It's just your feeling of sublimity. Oh, I see what you're doing there. To say all that you do is see through things creates a world that is translucent in which you actually see nothing.
Yep. Oh, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about absolute relativity, right? If everything is relative, there's nothing at all. it's the
Look
self-critique.
out, tell them, look out for my worldview. Cloudy when you sinking, got you thinking it's a whirlpool. Caesar in your pockets, you can't see who's in your pockets, but Stevie's inner visions touch your eyes and make the world move. Wifey bob her head.